All right, folks. Well, I think you can infer what today's video is about. We need to talk about the situation in Israel with Hamas and their 24-hour invasion that's now being met with a counterattack, and basically all-out war has broken out on the Gaza Strip. And don't get me wrong, I certainly don't enjoy having to talk about what is frankly a bloody and tragic situation. I'd much rather be commenting on the silliness of American politics and our culture. But, you know, this certainly is the biggest story in the world right now. It is engulfing all the discussion of mainstream news. As a political commentator, I suppose it would be strange to not at least give one video breaking it down and kind of giving my thoughts on the entire situation. But let me be clear about one thing. You know, if you came to this video to look for someone to add fuel to the fire of your anger, whatever side of the conflict you're personally on, you're not going to get that here. Right. And actually, there's a reason why this video has come out later. I kind of wanted to wait about 24 to 48 hours to actually start talking about this, because I think we as Americans, and yes, I'm calling out people on kind of both sides of this stuff here, tend to have a habit, right, of coming along with a situation like this that A, does not involve us, B, most Americans don't understand it or nearly come to understand the complexity of it all, and then C, obviously, is halfway around the world. We have a tendency to come along and just basically assert ourselves and our superior opinions as if any of us really know what we're talking about. In many cases, we don't, and that's kind of why I waited to kind of, you know, see it, discern a little bit. And, you know, most fundamentally, this is my stance on what's going on in the world right now, and I encourage everyone, but especially us Americans who don't really have an active dog in the conflict, to do this, which is, you know, most fundamentally, I look at the situation right now and I pray for peace. That's the truth. You know, you want to ask Vince, what's your thoughts on this conflict? That's the first and foremost answer I have to give you, because again, you know, whatever you think about the very complicated geopolitical decades that, you know, led up to all of this, the sheer reality of the situation on the ground is that hundreds to thousands of innocent Israeli and Palestinian civilians, many of them women, many of them children, many of them the elderly, are going to be needlessly killed in this conflict. And that's just the truth. And, you know, I look at a situation like that and say, really, the first thing I pray for is peace above all else, you know, above anything else, right? Because that's the human situation on the ground. And I would encourage a lot of Americans, again, who, like I said, don't really have a dog in this conflict. They're not fighting the conflict, but they feel so passionate about one side or the other. Guys, you know, unless you're going over to the Middle East right now to get involved in all this stuff, the first thing you should be praying for, again, is a peaceful resolution. Now, at the same time, I'm not naive, okay? I understand that war is hell in many ways. In many ways, it is like hell, and things happen, right? And there's going to be bloodshed and innocent lives taken on both sides of any war and any conflict. That's just the gray area of war, unfortunately. I'm not naive to that, nor am I pretending as if this entire situation can be resolved with a peace treaty in 24 hours, right? I think when you look between Israel and Hamas, it's probably going to take a lot more than that, right? But fundamentally, my hope and my prayer to God is that this can see a peaceful resolution as soon as possible. Okay. And I think, you know, it's especially sad. What's especially sad about it all, and you know, earlier I brought up the senseless killing of civilians that has happened and is going to happen on both sides, right? Is that what was the point of all of that? I think that's the saddest thing about this conflict, is that none of this had to happen, right? You know, and like I said, say what you will about the geopolitical decades that led up to all of this. I'm not honestly even an expert on that stuff. I couldn't really give you an answer. But I look at it even purely from a strategic perspective, and I'll commentate on the war a little bit here. You look at Hamas and their decision to go in and launch this surprise invasion on Israeli territory here. What were they thinking? You know? What did Hamas have to even gain from starting this conflict? And again, like, think what you will of their grievance and the grievances of the Palestinian state, or if you recognize it or whatever, right? From a strategic perspective here, you know how this is going to end. We all know how this is going to end, which is why it's sad, is because how this is going to end is that now, because of what Hamas did, Israel has, frankly, a probably justified pretense, right, to just go in there and basically do what they're going to do, which is likely level the entire Gaza Strip. And for what does Hamas have to gain from that? They're just going to be completely wiped off the face of the earth, as an organization, realistically, right? And we just talk about what seems like is going to happen from this war. But then on a deeper level, and again, this is why it even gets more tragic, is what do the Palestinian people have to gain from that? Because I get it. I know there's a lot of people in the West that have criticisms of Israel and all this stuff, but how can you defend that at the same time? I think, again, this entire situation is so tragic because it simply did not need to happen. And again, I don't know what Hamas was thinking doing this. But with all of that said, I am obviously an American. You watching this likely are an American, or you come to this channel to hear a perspective on American politics. So aside from what I think about the war itself and, how I feel about what's going on there, I think the most important question in this video is, what should Americans be thinking about this, and what should Americans be doing about all of this? Well, I think most Americans realistically are going to misinterpret the entire situation. I look at the way that Hamas surprise invaded Israel, just basically came over the border. No one was expecting it, blindsided, took a bunch of civilians hostage, all this craziness. And I say to America, this really should be a lesson about securing our borders. It's true. And I know people may say, but there's no Hamas waiting at the southern border to invade the United States. Well, it certainly doesn't help that the United States is open, does it not? Also, we do have violent paramilitary organizations to the south of the border. It's called the Mexican Cartel. It's called MS-13, right? And, I'm not saying it's the most realistic thing, but who's to say they don't want to take over a border town for some reason or something like that? Or even furthermore, or just inflict violence on Americans, right? Or even furthermore, though, you have to imagine this entire situation is probably going to cause a resurgence of the type of, radical Islamist terrorism that you saw, during the Obama and Bush years. And if you have a wide open southern border, you're putting two and two together here, right? Again, God forbid, but who's to say? The entire lesson simply should be a sign to Americans, hey, this is why you, and even if it's a quote unquote extreme example, it's still true, it's still valid. Hey, this is why you, as a civilized country, need to have a secure border, okay? Very sadly, I don't think most Americans are going to internalize that. And instead, the conversation is more so going to be about how we need to, instead of learning the lesson of Israel, we need to use, tax dollars and all this stuff to go and fund Israel. Some people likely will even call for direct troops on the ground. And I don't think that's firstly necessary. I don't think Israel needs the help. Israel massively outclasses Hamas in basically every stretch of the imagination. It's not exactly going to be a very two-sided war here, first of all. And then second of all, you have to ask an important question, which is, does America even have the resources? We do have to also consider we are our own country here, right? Do we even have the resources at this point to fund two proxy wars around the world? Because everyone complains about the Ukraine stuff and how much funding we give to them. But I was reading an article today basically saying that there is actually an ammunition shortage because we gave most of our military surpluses and stockpiles. We sent them over to Ukraine. There's an ammo shortage here in this country now because of it. So do we even have the resource? Like, just a manufacturing resource right now to be funding two proxy wars at once? These are all important questions to consider. Plus the morality of it. Plus the question of, is it our business? With the state that America's in right now, do we even belong, funding the proxy wars of other countries? Especially when, again, Israel is a wealthy country. It's not, exactly some third world, whatever. in that entire situation, right? So that's my stance on it. Really, is I don't think that America needs to get involved. I think Israel more than let's look at the class kind of the conflict here. Okay, Israel has got it in the bag. It's not exactly going to be a difficult. It will be difficult. Don't get me wrong, because people will die. But in terms of like who's going to win, who's going to lose, it's not going to be very difficult for Israel here. And I don't think that America, with the very limited resources we have as an economy, because everyone knows we're struggling on that regard, and even raw things like our ammunition supply, I just don't think it's America's business. But I do think that we ought to look at the situation, compare it to our own border that's very wide open here, and view it as a warning. View it as a warning, especially when you consider, again, the refugee crisis and all that stuff that's going to be coming out of the Middle East, and you consider the threat of a sleeper cell or an infiltrator, and you got a wide open southern border. It's a very serious and real thing to be concerned about. So anyways, like I said, those are my thoughts. Again, most fundamentally, pray for peace. Pray to end the bloodshed, because realistically, the end outcome of this is not going to be anything that's good. It's just the truth, right? And yeah, that's about all I have to say. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you guys, have a blessed week and all that. And peace.